everyone, and welcome to a special mashup episode of both DC Talks and Final Fantasy Occasionally. I am your host, Drew Kreisman, and on this episode, I'm going to talk about Theatrhythm Final Bar Line. And I guess technically I am at the very end of this. I'm going to do my best to review it. I thought about this. I started taking notes the way I've reviewed Triangle Strategy and Like a Dragon and Midnight Suns and Forspoken, right? And I was going through my normal process of doing that, and I just had to stop. I just had to put it away, you know. I was about to say, I threw it all in the trash can. I wasn't writing it on a legal pad because this isn't 1996. But, you know, typing it all out. And I just, you know, I still have the document, I guess, somewhere. But I realized that you can get a video game review. You can see the 9s and the 10s. You can go to IGN or GameSpot or Easy Allies is probably my favorite. You can find wherever. If you want a review of this video game, and again, at the end, I'll do a little bit of it, you can get that. I instead realized that I've got to tell you a story. I'm going to begin by saying Theatrhythm has basically taken over my life for the last couple of weeks. Part of that is a little bit of senior syndrome, as this is my last couple of weeks before the baseball season starts, and the amount of work that I do on a daily basis that doesn't revolve around nerdy stuff is about to quadruple. But why have I fallen so madly, deeply in love with this game? What does it mean to me? And why has it basically become my new religion? And I figure the best way to do that is to tell you 3 stories. The first is a story that we told on the very first episode of Final Fantasy Weekly, but I'm going to go a little more in depth, and it revolves around my brother and I discovering the Final Fantasy series, particularly through the 6th installment of the game, and my history a little bit as a musician. The second is going to be my story about discovering Guitar Hero, which you can guess why that might be relevant. And then the third story will be how I've come to really what my life has been for the last week and a half with, it's probably not even been that long with Theatrhythm. So I'm going to begin with, it had to have been 1995 or 1996 when my family took a vacation, a trip down to visit more family in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, with our aunt and uncle, and I can't remember if that was a trip where our parents were with us or if our parents had sent my brother and I down there to stay for a little while with them or what it was, but my brother and I were there, and as I've told in the story before, I was right at that age. If it's 1996, if it's after October 18th, then I'm 10 years old. If it's before that, then I'm 9 years old, right? And so you're kind of getting into that age where you're starting to feel like you're growing up a bit. Maybe you want to be a teenager. I had an older brother, who's 5 years older than me. And so you're curious about those types of video games, right? And I remember Mortal Kombat being a really big deal at the time. And I remember really wanting to play it because I wanted to see, I knew my Uncle Dave had it. And it's a Super Nintendo era, right? And so that one didn't even have the blood, had the sweat, for those of you that know. But I just really wanted to play Mortal Kombat because that was my idea of an adult video game. And we had a younger cousin for whom, it was questionable for me. For him, definitely you're not playing Mortal Kombat in front of him at that age. And so we kind of had to wait until nighttime. And in the waiting, we were just kind of looking through the other Super Nintendo games that Uncle Dave had lying around. And one of them happened to be Final Fantasy III, right? Final Fantasy VI on the Super Nintendo. And it must have been around the opera scene. And the only reason I remember that specifically is just, I remember more the feeling than anything else of just falling in love with the game. Having never really seen anything quite like it. And obviously the music was one of the very first things that pulled me in. Even if subconsciously, even if I wouldn't have said that at 9 or 10 years old, I would have said, oh, the characters are so cool, the story is interesting, and oh man, those magic spells and these creatures are wild. But the music is obviously this ever-present part of the Final Fantasy franchise, right? And at some point during that vacation, I'd fallen asleep on top of one of those old keyboard, electronic, really cheapo, Casio keyboard. Not even a real keyboard. It was like a toy where it had little buttons on it and they would make tones. I remember it waking me up in the middle of the night because I'd rolled over on it, right? And it was going beep boop deep boop up. And for whatever reason, I just remember waking up in the middle of the night and kind of playing around with it. Being oh, this is kind of cool. I want to figure out these tones. And I must have had Celeste's theme, the main theme from the opera, Oh My Hero, and all of that, stuck in my head. right? Because it's beautiful, it's wonderful. And I just figured it out. I just kind of playing around with that little toy, I figured out how to play Celeste's theme. And I was just overjoyed. I remember in the morning, look what I learned how to do. Look what I learned. I can play the song from the game, and I figured it out all on my own. And it was just one of my earliest memories of being like really proud of having done something, especially something creative. You know, I was obviously really into like sports and stuff as a kid, so I did a lot of those kinds of things. But this is, you know, something new and different and unique that I had done. And I really wouldn't pick up a guitar in earnest until I was like 20 years old. I did play French horn in the band for years, so I've always sort of been musically inclined. But that was one of the first introductions to me, for one, how much music kind of runs in my blood and how much it matters to me and how much it sinks into me, even if subconsciously. And then obviously my falling in love with the Final Fantasy franchise, right? So kind of two very formative things for me. My love of Final Fantasy, my love of music, and then of course at the center of that, my love of Final Fantasy music. And so since that day, and since my brother and I have fallen in love with this franchise, the music has always been there for me. The video games last for the 30 or the 40, 50, 60 hours you play them for. And, you know, you can go back and do them again, and we have several times, and we're doing them for this podcast. But I would we had all the CDs. You know, we had the specialty albums. We've talked about this on several episodes, right? Of Celtic Moon, reunion tracks, you name it. If it was available in the United States to get on CD, and I imagine Ira had to have done the vast majority of the research for figuring out how to actually order these and stuff, and getting the okay for our parents, who I assume bought all of these things. The music, and we had all the original soundtracks. Like, I can still remember the 4-disc CD set for the OST, like the MIDI sounds of Final Fantasy VI, and I would listen to that thing on my little compact CD Walkman. It wasn't a Walkman, because Walkman was for cassette tapes. This would have been right after that era, and it's tough because those walkable CD things, you'd scratch up your CDs a lot, and so I scratched the hell out of those 4 Final Fantasy VI OSTs, not on purpose, not out of neglect, maybe out of some of that because I was a child, but just from listening to it over and over and over again. And I would take it to school with me. I'd listen on the bus. I would listen at school. This is what I was listening to when, you know, the boy bands and the Britney Spearses and all that stuff was blowing up in the world, and the pop culture of the late 90s really was taking off. And for me, the music of middle school and high school was the music of Final Fantasy. Every soundtrack, every piece of music. Also, as I get into high school, a new phenomenon appears. The rhythm game. Guitar Hero is maybe the only rhythm game ever that I would say probably deserved to be nominated for and or win Game of the Year, whatever year it came out, and I'd have to look at other games. But, you know, normally I'm one of those, I don't know about racing or sports games with rhythm, some of these sort of side genres, winning Game of the Year. But, right, sometimes a thing comes along and it's such a phenomenon, and it so kind of shifts the way we even think about playing video games. And I'm pretty sure, like, DDR had existed before. Right, so arcades had always had, maybe not always, but long had rhythm games of some sort. And the idea is clearly, right, it feels good. If the whole thing of a video game is input command, thing on screen, do what you want, then input command to keep up the beat, keep the rhythm, conduct the song. Oh man, that just reminded me of, what was that old game? Someone will hit me up in the comments. There was a game where you could play as the conductor that I had for like the PS2. It was actually pretty fun. But Guitar Hero was truly a sensation. And I remember in high school being there and it being this massive deal, and people would get together, and normally, you know, the LAN parties that had all been Halo LAN parties or whatever else we'd been doing, everything stopped. And even people that didn't play video games were waiting their turn so that they could get in and play Guitar Hero, because you could kind of appreciate it on the fundamental level. Most of the music was pretty fun and good. And again, you could kind of understand the basic premise, even if you're not a game player. What do? You press the button when the note comes up, and if you know the song, you can kind of press along, and it feels good. A good rhythm game, right? It just feels satisfying. And so I just remember for those couple of years Guitar Hero, and even into the Rock Band thing. And I think I got Rock Band 1, but at that point I think some of the novelty of it and some of the joy of it was starting to wear off for me. And basically since Rock Band 1, I haven't really played any rhythm games, right? And it's funny, it was like this thing that I felt like it burned hot and fast and it burned out quickly for me, where it was just this huge thing that I did with my friends, and it was absolutely incredible for several years, and then I just had no need for it ever again, as far as I was concerned. And so, as much as those are very special memories to me, and I can remember like just how insanely intense I got into those games and how addictive they were at the time, I remember thinking, okay, I'm basically good on that genre. To the extent that when the first version of Theatrhythm came out for the 3DS, I had no interest. Now, a lot of it was I had no interest in mobile gaming at the time. I had kind of gotten out on the whole idea. I had a DS. I don't think... Man, I'm getting old. I'm pretty sure I didn't have a 3DS. That might have also been part of it, right? I bought a PSP specifically to play Crisis Core and had sold it off. And after that, I think as much as I enjoyed that experience of the game, I don't think I enjoyed the experience of playing on mobile. And I still don't to this day. Like, I only played Final Fantasy Tactics on mobile for the podcast because that was the only way to do it. And again, people have told me, dude, it's fine on mobile. Like, you shouldn't tell people not to play on their phone, but I just can't do it. So that's for me, right? So I didn't play the original Theatrhythm. And again, my thoughts on it were, cool, Final Fantasy should have a thing like that. But it's another side game, and I basically put it in the category of some other side Final Fantasy games that I hadn't played throughout the years, like Chocobo Dungeon, which, by the way, I'm also realizing recently is better than I had given it credit for. Chocobo Kart Racing that I've never got, things like that. I just like, sure, I'm glad it exists. I'm happy it's Final Fantasy. If I ever get around to trying it, I'm sure I'll enjoy myself for a couple of hours, but then I'll put it away as the kind of side content that it is, right? And then about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, a demo came out for a game called Theatrhythm Final Fantasy Final Bar Line, or whatever the hell it's called. And it's a demo. And a lot of people are, hey, you gonna try out the demo? Yeah, check out the demo, right? It's on your PlayStation. I didn't have to get a new system. I didn't have to go out of my way. A free thing, try it. They got 30 songs you can play. See if and a lot of people have talked about, obviously something I can't speak to, how the gameplay of the 3DS with the stylus and whatever, right, where you would have been tapping on the touchscreen, how that translates to now a video game controller. And I can't speak to that. I can only say that basically took me 5 to 10 songs to feel like, okay, I understand how this is supposed to feel. I understand how it's supposed to work. I thought the game did a very good job of teaching me what it was. And then about an hour and a half or 2 hours into playing the thing, I just, to the surprise of no one who's been listening to me for a long time, I just started crying. Like, and I think it was all of these experiences coming back to me, right? The remembrance of how foundational Final Fantasy music has been in my life, at the very least since I was 9 years old. And not just as oh man, I've always enjoyed this. Like, it's been my favorite music from that day to this day. As somebody who now has played in several different bands and had a little while there where music was my primary source of income, someone who's studied the Beatles and Bob Dylan and more contemporaries like Radiohead and Coldplay and used bands like that to help me form my sound. I love those types of things. Queen, Green Day. I have a wide variety of, could go back and talk about classics, Bach and Beethoven and all. Nobuo Uematsu's music specifically, but Final Fantasy music more broadly, is the soundtrack of my life. And this rhythm game addiction that I haven't had since I was 20 years old is back 16 years later, and I just can't get enough. There are little things. I guess I'll end on a little more romanticism. Let me do the little bit of video game review here. I'll sandwich it in. There are little things. I was thinking, like I said, as I was taking notes, I have fewer critiques than I have ways I could imagine, because I said at one point I said to myself this thought: I cannot imagine a way in which this game could be better at achieving what it set out to achieve. And then I thought, well, maybe that's a little bit of an overreach, right? There are a handful of songs that are really long that get cut short, and that's unfortunate. I totally understand why they did it, because sometimes playing a 12-minute song, especially like in multiplayer and stuff, ain't going to be fun. I feel like there could have been some ways around that. Maybe sometimes it's the first half, sometimes it's the second half, so you don't miss all of it each time, or on higher difficulties you get the whole song. I don't know. So there are a handful of pieces of music that get truncated, and that's disappointing. There are, like, I was really reaching for criticisms of this, right? And despite the fact that there are over 400 pieces of music in the game as it launches, I could still think of music from every single entry that didn't make the cut that could have been there. I will say I think there are some biases. Biases is a weird word to use, but there's clearly a preference for battle music. There are probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 different versions of the battle on the Big Bridge from Final Fantasy V in the game, and there's nothing wrong with that, because almost all of them are interesting in their own ways, and it's an incredible piece of music. But whenever there's repeats like that, you're bound to think of, well, what about some incredible pieces of music that just aren't in the game at all? That said, I can understand why some of the more beautiful pieces in the franchise were left out, because they aren't as rhythmically interesting, and ultimately this is a rhythm video game and not just a showcase of the music. But boy, is it a reminder that Final Fantasy does not miss when it comes to the music. And as most of you know, from a content standpoint, it's not just Final Fantasy. They've got stuff from the Saga games, they've got old Legend stuff. They're going to have Chrono Cross and Chrono Trigger, and the way they're talking about it, I wouldn't be surprised if in a year or two from now, when maybe I finally am starting to feel like, okay, I've played enough of this game, that's when they announce they're going to have Kingdom Hearts music for it, because it's too rock steady. Everything from the amount of music they have to all the different little RPG elements you can do with the characters, customizing it for yourself, whether you want to play it competitively online in the most difficult rhythms possible, on the most difficult songs possible, and make it an intense rhythm game experience, or you want to play it on the simplest mode possible and play the pretty songs and basically play it as a relaxing game. You can, or anything in between, and I've done both. I've had nights where I'm really, really tired, can't fall asleep. Some of you know, recently Kat's been having some health issues. I've been trying to stay up with her a little bit, and I don't have the energy to do Supreme Ultimate Challenge of One Winged Angel, but I can play the main theme of Final Fantasy VII on basic mode and just relax while also like leveling up my characters and enjoying the music. Like so I've put over 60 hours to the game in basically 5 days. I don't play games like that anymore. I tweeted out something like, this review should have come out 3 or 4 days ago, but I couldn't stop playing the game. And somebody replied, and they're absolutely right, like, that's the review. Like, you can't get to your review because you can't stop playing the game. And it's 100% true. Look, back to the thing I said earlier about rhythm games and game of the year or whatever. I've joked a couple of times that this is the game of the year. It won't be, and it probably shouldn't be, because, man, one other way I could have imagined it being better is they could have actually snuck some story content in here. But I'm almost glad they didn't, because then it would have been too much. Like I said, I was already getting emotional. But one thing I do want to say, this might be slightly spoilery. I don't think so. Just as something that they have in the game. It's weird to say spoilery for a rhythm game. But the way you unlock songs is you go through each game and you do story quests. It's usually pretty easy to unlock all the songs. And then once you get to the end of a game, let's say Final Fantasy VI has, 17 songs, but 10 stages you have to clear. So you clear the 10 stages and you've cleared the title, right? And then at the end of that, you'll unlock a special movie. It's basically like a little music video that they put together for a special track from each game. And these little music videos are just, again, when I talk about the little details that are in the game that they didn't necessarily have to be there, and not having them there, I wouldn't have subtracted points, but stuff like that, just every single one of them has brought a tear to my eye in the way that they beautifully encapsulate what the game felt like. the stories, the characters, and of course it all being tied together through the music. So, if there are people out there who are like, I prefer the 3DS version, the controls were tighter, this, that, or the other, I totally understand that. If there are people who wish, hey, there could have been more story. Oh, one critique I've seen I absolutely have to address, and very quickly, because I'm making this a pretty positive episode. But I did see several review sites and a few people take off points because there's DLC. And this, for me, is actually the biggest confirmation that I've ever needed that the critiques about Final Fantasy 15 were nonsense. Because if there's not enough content in Theatrhythm for you, to the extent that you don't think it's fair that they would charge you for more, then there's no such thing as enough content in a baseline game. If Theatrhythm didn't have enough baseline content to justify more stuff being okay to charge whatever it is, and I bought the digital deluxe edition, there's going to be several more DLCs that come out, but yeah, I'm sorry, again, this is one of those things where people seem to be getting upset on the general principle of it feels like they held stuff out so they could charge us for it later, without recognizing that they would never in a billion years feel like content was held out of this game if we just never got any more. Right? If it was just the 400 songs you get with the base game and nothing else, they wouldn't have this argument to be made, but the game would in no way be better. In zero ways would that make the experience better. In fact, in several ways, it makes the experience worse, because it would take away people's ability to, if they choose, spend a little extra money for a little more content. But the idea that there isn't enough content in the baseline of this game is profoundly absurd. So yes, that's my one little thing there. To finish out, if I haven't made it abundantly clear, I adore this game. I've been asked, what if I've only played, say, the PS2 and on era, or conversely, the PS1 and earlier era? What about because I could say, 400 songs or whatever, but if 200 of those are from games you haven't played and are pieces of music that you're not familiar with, is the game going to still be fun or exciting to you? And I will say this, as much as I have enjoyed replaying the classics from 4 and 6 and 7 and reliving my early childhood into teen years memories and doing all of that, and quite frankly, again, just interacting with pieces of music that mean something to me and have meant something to me my entire life, that's all been great. That's all been wonderful. That's what I was hoping for going in, that's delivered even better than I thought. But what has amazed me about this experience is that almost as profound, maybe more profound than that, has been how much I've fallen in love with new music. From the parts of Final Fantasy XIV that I haven't gotten to, there were 2 pieces of music, both featuring female vocals, that's all I'll say for now, that blew my mind. And I'll eventually hear them if I get long enough into Final Fantasy XIV, but it might be a while. Some of the older songs, I never played Romancing Saga. I got a piece from that because I was challenging somebody online. It's never a piece I would have chosen. I played it and I was like, this slaps hard. I'm purposefully doing the counter to this. Whenever I go online and play against people, I typically choose a song from Final Fantasy Tactics or Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. One, because I think it gives me a slight advantage because I don't think people are as familiar with that music as I am and I want to beat them. But secondly, because I want more people to hear that music. There are songs from 13.2 and Lightning Returns that I wasn't nearly as familiar with that I've fallen in love with over this. I'll give you the best iteration of this that's happened. I didn't play Record Keeper. I that's a slight lie. I played Record Keeper for about 1 hour, and then I never touched it ever again. I think Ira played it for maybe 5 to 10. He can correct me later on that, but a little longer. But neither of us ever got super deep into Record Keeper. It's a mobile game for those of you that don't even know what it is, maybe. And some of its remixes and rearrangements and medleys from the series before that were takes on pieces of music that I've known my whole life but that I've never heard before, that was worth the price of admission alone. And I think there's only like 10 songs on the Record Keeper series, but those things, or things like from earlier versions of Theatrhythm or Dissidia, tracks that are pieces that I'm familiar with, but not the versions I'm familiar with. Like, the game just keeps delivering remarkable experience after remarkable experience. If you like Final Fantasy, if you like Final Fantasy music, and if you even kind of tolerate rhythm games, I cannot recommend it more highly. Again, it is one of those things where if rhythm games just aren't your thing, it's not your thing, and this probably isn't going to change your mind on it. But if you've ever enjoyed your time playing a video game, and if you're listening to this, you're almost certainly a Final Fantasy fan and a fan of the music, I can't recommend it more highly. I really, really can't. If anything, I issue a warning. Be careful. Make sure you tell your friends and your family and your loved ones that you love them to come in and get you if you can't pull yourself away for too long. Remember to take breaks, drink plenty of water, because it's so good. So that has been my story with Theatrhythm. Obviously, no zealot like a convert, right? I have come on full board. I will scream far and wide about this game. If it ever goes on sale, I'm going to link to it. If it's, any of those things, because it being a niche thing probably means that not as many people will get to experience it. But as I said before, I have a very difficult time imagining ways in which this thing could be a better version of what it is. A celebration of the incredible music of Final Fantasy and Square Enix, and a really fun time. Thank you all for listening in to this episode of both things. I really appreciate you all out there. If you haven't yet, maybe consider pitching in $1 for the Patreon page. Either one of them will get you access to the Discord, which also gets you a vote in our big nerdy tourney. The fantasy bracket is getting really tight right now. It's coming down to the wire on some of these big name things. And we've got comic books, anime, and sci-fi coming up. So if you want to get involved, just takes $1, subscribe to the Patreon page. Either one of them, or both is good too. Both is also good, like the meme says. And even if you don't, I still appreciate you hanging out, listening to my thoughts on Theatrhythm and, maybe Forspoken, Triangle Strategy, those kinds of things from time to time as well. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. Everything is Final Fantasy. Thank you for continuing to be absolutely awesome out there. You know that I will continue to be absolutely Drew Creasman in here, and until next time, I will see you out there in the world.